Mourned former U.S. President Jimmy Carter, who died on Sunday at 100 years old. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump promises a stricter enforcement of America's immigration laws. We'll have details on what that might mean. And 2024 saw turmoil in the Middle East. Israel is attacked by Hamas. Gaza is destroyed in retaliation. And the Bashar al-Assad regime is ousted in Syria. We'll have a report from Beirut. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. The world is mourning former U.S. President Jimmy Carter, who died on Sunday at the age of 100. The Georgia peanut farmer served as one turbulent term in the White House before building a reputation as an international humanitarian. He won a Nobel Peace Prize while becoming the most internationally engaged former U.S. president. VOA's Ken Farabaugh extensively covered Carter's life and post-presidential career and has more on the legacy of the 39th president of the United States.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
When Jimmy Carter took the oath of office on January 20th, 1977, he promised a government as good as its people.
There can be no nobler nor more ambitious task for America to undertake on this day of a new beginning than to help shape a just and peaceful world.
A world he continued to shape beyond his single term in the White House, becoming a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, heading the global nonprofit, the Carter Center, whose mission is waging peace, fighting disease, and building hope.
I look upon the Carter Center work as an extension of what I try to do as president.
Carter was born in Plains, Georgia in 1924. He graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1946, serving as a submarine officer before returning to Plains in 1953 to run the family farm in the wake of his father's death. Carter entered politics during the civil rights movement of the 1960s, serving 2 terms as a Georgia legislator before becoming the state's governor in 1971.
I say to you quite frankly that the time for racial discrimination is over.
Carter went from being an unknown Southern governor in 1971 to the winning presidential candidate in 1976, narrowly defeating Republican Gerald Ford. Mediating the 1979 Camp David Accords and the eventual peace treaty between Egypt and Israel was the pinnacle of Carter's presidency.
There had been 4 wars between Arabs and Israelis in the previous 25 years, with the Egyptians and the leadership supported by the Soviet Union. They were the only country that could really challenge Israel militarily.
Carter also negotiated a treaty returning control of the Panama Canal to Panama and established full diplomatic ties with the People's Republic of China. But the 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran would change the course of his presidency. Protests led by Shiite clerics toppled the U.S.-backed Shah, who fled the country. Militants later stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 66 Americans hostage. In late November of that year, 13 hostages were released. In April 1980, Carter authorized a military operation to free the remaining hostages. It failed, and 8 U.S. service members died. Carter also faced challenges at home. Inflation and rising unemployment hobbled the economy, contributing to his 1980 election defeat to Republican Ronald Reagan. On January 20th, 1981, Reagan's inauguration day, Iran finally freed the American hostages. Carter, defeated and depressed, returned to Plains to plan his presidential library.
I envisioned it to be a tiny thing, where I would have an office and some nice buildings in Atlanta.
It became much more. A well-known global nonprofit, the Carter Center has monitored over 100 elections and mediated disputes ranging from a nuclear standoff with North Korea in 1994 to a peace agreement between Uganda and Sudan. The center also promotes health and fights illness in the poorest parts of the planet. Eradicating guinea worm disease has been a primary goal.
There's only been one disease in the history of humankind ever eradicated, and that was smallpox, more than 30 years ago. So guinea worm is going to soon be the second disease in history to be wiped off the face of the earth.
Carter's work helping humanity led to Oslo, Norway in 2002. where he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize.
When I won the Nobel Peace Prize, for instance, it was because of the work of the Carter Center. So I would be perfectly satisfied to have a legacy based on peace and human rights. I mean, who wouldn't?
Carter led an active life into his 90s, surviving brain cancer in 2015. But declining health and the 2020 global coronavirus pandemic kept him confined to his hometown of Plains in his final years. In one of his last public media appearances, Carter shared with VOA his hopes for the future.
I would like to see the United States in the future strive to be the #1 champion in the world of peace and human rights and environmental equality, and I would say treating everybody equal. If we could do that, we'd have a real superpower in the country that I love very much.
Carter lived the longest of any occupant of the White House, and his 76-year marriage to wife Rosalind is the longest of any president and first lady. Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Plains, Georgia.
U.S. President Joe Biden is remembering former President Jimmy Carter as, quote, a statesman, a humanitarian, and a dear friend. President Biden took time out of his vacation in the U.S. Virgin Islands to pay tribute to the 39th U.S. president.
What I find extraordinary about Jimmy Carter, though, is that millions of people all around the world, all over the world, feel they lost a friend as well, even though they never met him. And that's because Jimmy Carter lived a life measured not by words, but by his deeds.
U.S. President-elect Donald Trump also paid tribute to Carter in a post on his Truth Social platform, saying the challenges Carter faced in the Oval Office came at a pivotal time for our country, and that we'll all owe him a debt of gratitude. Other world leaders offered personal tributes to Carter on the social media platform X, including French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Residents also laid flowers and even jars of peanuts at the entrance of Carter's presidential center in Atlanta, Georgia. Carter was a Georgia peanut farmer who was elected governor of the southeastern U.S. state in the early 1970s before being elected as president in 1976. Jimmy Carter served a single term as president from January 1977 to January 1981 after defeating incumbent Republican Gerald Ford. Carter was swept from office 4 years later in an electoral landslide by Republican Ronald Reagan, a former actor and California governor. For 17 years, VOA correspondent Kane Fairbaugh has covered the life and legacy of Jimmy Carter, developing a close friendship with America's 39th president. He shares his personal reflections about the late world leader and influential humanitarian.
So start on that camera. When we first met in 2006 during one of his book tours, I had not yet interviewed a former president. I was nervous. Jimmy Carter, on the other hand.
It's also not the first time you've probably done this.
No, it's not the first time.
Over the course of nearly 2 decades and dozens of one-on-one interviews, Carter became more than just the subject of my news reports. He became a friend to me and my family, and even spent time with my children, incling my eldest son, Lucas.
I want to shake hands with you. Your father's one of my best friends. You like him too? Is he a good father or not?
My desire to better understand the 39th president's life and legacy brought me to events and symposiums around the country organized by the Carter Center, his global nonprofit organization. I came to know a punctual man more interested in concrete results than the optics or politics surrounding them. A supremely humble and patient citizen of the world who made time for everyone who sought him out.
All right, everybody look this way. Good.
I also collected and read books, those he wrote and those written about him. And I often visited Plains, Georgia, to see him teach Sunday school.
Since we are given this free gift of God, we should be what? Joyful and happy and thankful, right?
And participated in events hosted in his hometown.
When I teach, Plains prospers.
Initially, I didn't know anyone in Plains except the former president and his wife, former First Lady Rosalind Carter. But I was welcomed like a neighbor by those close to him, and through the years, forged friendships that endure today.
Oh, dear King! You see what my family was like. Aren't you all amazed that I became president?
My friendship with Carter led to hosting panel discussions and participating in town hall meetings, personal dinners, fishing trips, and book signings across the country.
I saw the clip about releasing the sea turtles. That must have been exciting, right?
For our grandchildren,
Yeah.
our great-grandchildren.
But it was during our semi-regular exclusive interviews that covered everything from neglected tropical diseases to Mideast peace.
Leaving the White House seems to have been the best thing that could have happened to you, really.
I didn't think so at the time, but it's turned out to be.
That I came to understand what was important to Carter and why.
You bring a voice and awareness to people that otherwise wouldn't have a voice in the
That's
international
an important part of the Carter Center is to bring some publicity to the plight of people that may otherwise be ignored.
Some might think my friendship with Carter would prevent me from reporting on him objectively. However, I did not avoid difficult or controversial topics with him.
Their contention is that just by the fact that you visit with Hamas provides legitimacy to the way that they behave and they act.
You know, first of all, my visit didn't legitimize or delegitimize anybody.
Our friendship also didn't prevent me from covering Carter's difficult moments, such as his 2015 announcement he was dealing with life-threatening cancer.
President Carter, Kane Fairbaugh with Voice of America.
Okay.
I wanted to ask, what has been the most difficult part about the news for you?
The liver surgery was fairly extensive. They removed about 1/10 of my liver, I understand.
President Carter survived his battle with cancer, but suffered further health setbacks. Despite falling and fracturing his hip in 2019, Carter did not cancel our interview ahead of his 95th birthday.
Hi, Gabe.
Good morning, President Carter. How are you?
I'm fine.
It's so good to see you.
You look snazzy this morning.
Well, not as good as you.
In 2011, President Carter's son Jeff wrote a book documenting the ancestry of his parents. While reading it, I discovered I had an even stronger connection to President Carter. We are related through my 11th great-grandparents, some of the early settlers of Rhode Island, and Jimmy Carter was my 9th cousin, 3 times removed. But beyond an ancestral connection, while he is remembered as a peanut farmer, submariner, governor, artist, fisherman, Nobel Peace Prize recipient, carpenter, global humanitarian, and
He's often referred to as the greatest ex-president.
Yeah, and I don't like that. He was a great president. People are finding it out.
Jimmy Carter will always be, to me, the greatest man I have ever met and will ever have the good fortune to call my friend.
Thanks for giving us so much time. And
It's a pleasure.
It's always great to talk to you.
Pleasure to be with you, King. Thank
Okay.
you.
Well, we always welcome the chance to talk to you, President
I
Carter.
always like to be with you. You have some very good questions, and I enjoy being with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining us at the Voice of America.
It's always good to be with you.
It's always
Thank
good
you.
to be with you too, President Carter.
Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Chicago, Illinois.
For more on the late former U.S. President's contribution to Africa, I'm joined live from Nairobi, Kenya by Macharia Munene, a professor of history and international relations at the U.S. International University in Nairobi. Professor Munene, welcome again to Africa 54. What would you say set Jimmy Carter's presidency apart from other U.S. presidents?
Well, he is the one president who made human rights an instrument of his foreign policy. No other president, as far as I know, before or after, did that. So that distinguishes him completely from the rest. Yes, he was a cold warrior, like all the others, but he made human rights the cornerstone of his foreign policy, and he stands out because of that.
And how would you describe his relationship with the continent of Africa and its people?
It was symbolic. He was the most pro-African president since John Kennedy. Kennedy stood out because of his anti-colonial stand, and Jimmy Carter came close to it, symbolically partly because of appointing Andrew Young, the ambassador to the United Nations, and Andrew Young made no secret about his attachment to Africa. There were a few incidents here and there, like when Jomo Kenyatta died, he sent a very powerful delegation to the funeral. He made a point of inviting Daniel Moi in 1980 to the White House to have a good dinner and then discuss how they are going to deal with issues that come up. He was close to Mobutu and things of the sort. But all the time, he was pushing the American agenda the best way he knew how, as opposed to the confrontational way, but an approach that would be acceptable. He is better known in Africa after the presidency than during the presidency, because he was unrestrained after the presidency in getting immersed in visits to Africa, many of them, trying to eradicate diseases, monitoring elections. He became a permanent feature. Whenever there's something arose, he was there. So he's better known after the presidency than the presidency. But even when he was president, he made some mark.
Professor, you are a historian, and according to American historians, President Carter was a break from the political order then, especially during the Watergate scandal. How was he able to escape from being tainted by the politics of the day and the stench that was seen around that time?
Well, he was a breath of fresh air, the peanut farmer, and thrived in talking about peanuts. Compared to what had gone before, Richard Nixon, and then Gerald Ford being tarnished, and before Richard Nixon there was Lyndon Johnson, and they were all contaminated by either the Vietnam War or the Watergate scandal. So when he wrote his little book, Why Not the Best, implying he was going to be the best. So he was a breath of fresh air. He could not be compared to the others. And that's the reason he won, that he was not contaminated by Watergate or Vietnam. So he supposedly was the best for the moment when he got elected in 1976.
Professor, very quickly, what can world leaders and those aspiring to lead their nations learn from Carter?
One, they need to be focused. They need to be clear what it is that they are trying to do, to be aware of the environment, and apart from being aware of the environment, to be consistent and not to mislead the public, to be truthful to their people, to the world as far as they could tell. But being truthful to the world does not mean that you jeopardize your national interest. Carter was always very clear about an American national interest, even when he tried to project a more acceptable image than what the other presidents had done before him. So future presidents or current ones may want to learn humility, focus, and commitment to the national interests of their particular countries.
Very well said, Professor. Mr. Munene, thank you very much. Macharia Munene Macharia Munene is a professor of history and international relations at the U.S. International University in Nairobi, Kenya. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump made immigration a key focus of his 2024 presidential campaign. His incoming administration is planning stricter enforcement. VOA's immigration correspondent Elaine Barrows explains what this means.
In his presidential campaign, Donald Trump promised stricter border measures, including greater detention and deportation of undocumented immigrants.
We're going to end up with the largest deportation in American history. We have no choice. Have no choice, right? Have no choice. We have no choice because that's not sustainable by any country.
Possible Trump plans include expanded detention facilities and a return to the Remain in Mexico policy, requiring migrants to stay in Mexico during U.S. immigration proceedings. Trump's pick for border czar, Tom Homan, says tougher enforcement will focus on improving public safety and national security.
On the heels of the biggest illegal immigration crisis we've ever seen in this nation, there has to be a massive deportation operation.
Some immigration experts say mass deportations weaken public safety by discouraging immigrants from reporting crimes.
Immigrants are more likely than the average U.S.-born person to report crimes to the police. But studies have repeatedly shown that when indiscriminate enforcement increases in an area, that reduces that already high rate of crime reporting or higher rate of crime reporting among immigrants.
If migrants do not have criminal records, Democratic and Republican administrations have generally released them while they await immigration hearings. That may end with the incoming administration considering mandatory detention.
If I were a lawful permanent resident, a green card holder, I'd be sure to have my green card on my person now.
Trump officials argue that these measures will deter criminals, but Beer found that was not what happened last time.
Mass deportation is going to deprioritize serious offenders. When the Trump administration came in last time, they rescinded all the requirements to focus on serious offenders, felons first, and as a result, not surprisingly, ICE doubled the number of arrests of non-criminals.
Meanwhile, he says the number of criminals found attempting to cross the border tripled. Trump says he will act on immigration on day one of his presidency, January 20th. Aline Barrows, VOA News, Washington.
In East Africa, Kenyan police fired tear gas to disperse protesters demonstrating in Nairobi on Monday against what they say is a wave of unexplained abductions of government critics. Dozens of Kenyans have been abducted in recent months, according to human rights groups, who blame the extrajudicial arrests on Kenya's police and intelligence services. Some groups of young protesters marched in downtown Nairobi, while others staged a sit-in and chanted slogans against the government, with some holding placards denouncing illegal detentions, according to video shown on the NTV broadcaster. The police have commented on Monday's protest. The alleged abductions followed anti-government protests that started back in June. Kenyan authorities have said that the government does not condone or engage in extrajudicial killings or abductions. In North Central Africa, voters in Chad cast their ballots Sunday in a general election that government says is a key step toward ending military rule. Turnout was expected to be low after the opposition called for a boycott. Midday figures suggested a turnout of just 38% to choose a new parliament, provincial assemblies and local councils, according to the Elections Management Agency. Election officials in the upmarket district where President Mahamat Idris Deby's family and ruling dignitaries live says voter apathy was due to cold weather. But opposition parties had urged Chad's 8 million voters to shun the election, the results of which they say had been decided in advance. Souk Masra, the leader of the opposition Transformers Party, says the boycott leaves the field open for candidates aligned with President Mahamat Idris Deby, who was brought to power by the military in 2021 and then legitimized in a presidential election in May that opposition candidates denounced as fraudulent. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, reflections of the 2024, a year filled with turmoil in the Middle East. We'll be right back.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, we take a look at the players of the technology industry in Africa, big and small.
Big tech wasn't really here. What have they seen in the past 10 years, which is making all of them want to put their HQ here?
If you're a business that sees itself going global, we'll definitely need some sort of like boosts. We need to tap into those existing networks that these big tech companies do provide.
Is there a downside to big investment in Africa?
In other news, as Mozambique grapples with a political crisis followed by a disputed national election and violent protests, the situation at its southern border with South Africa is increasingly volatile, affecting trade and travel. The violence in Mozambique is forcing trade and travel to be diverted from South Africa's Lebombo border post to Eswatini's Mananga border post. 2024 saw a major reordering of the balance of power in the Middle East. Lebanon yet again was at the center of this upheaval as Israel launched raids and heavy airstrikes in response to attacks from Hezbollah, destroying swaths of the country in the process. A fragile ceasefire in November silenced the bombing for a short while, but the regime change in Syria threatens more instability in 2025. Jacob Brasso reports from Beirut.
Even by Lebanon standards, 2024 was a tumultuous year. War between Hezbollah and Israel engulfed the country after simmering along the border for almost a year. Hezbollah's powerful and charismatic leader, Hassan Nasrallah, was killed, along with much of the senior leadership. Previously a major political force in Lebanon and a staunch Iranian ally, the party was left reeling and agreed to ceasefire conditions at the end of November.
I think Iran and what's left of Hezbollah have calculated that they need a de-escalation. They need several years of calm and stability to figure out the way forward for Iran and for themselves, for their strategy to rebuild Hezbollah.
But calm and stability are proving elusive. Barely hours after the ceasefire went into effect, November 27th, rebels in neighboring Syria launched a large-scale offensive that within 2 weeks toppled the Assad regime after more than 13 years of civil war. Hezbollah has been pivotal in keeping Assad in power.
In a war with all these variables, you understand fully well, as any force would in Syria, that you just had a chance. Hezbollah is downgraded, Iran is struggling, Russia is struggling in Ukraine. It's the right time to move.
The fall of Assad cut off supply routes between Iran and an already weakened Hezbollah. Along with ceasefire conditions that call for Hezbollah to pull back from the Israeli border, analysts see a window of opportunity for Lebanon.
South Lebanon no longer serves a strategic military function for Iran. That's a blessing for Lebanon. That means they're not going to invest in major military presence in southern Lebanon.
As ever, there is a delicate balance to be struck. Hezbollah has been a major regional player for decades and maintains a large and loyal civilian constituency in Lebanon. Its collapse would leave a dangerous vacuum.
But if we're going to go for a full crushing defeat of Hezbollah on the level of, like Ba'ath in Iraq, we're going to see an endless war in the region where car bombs go from Baghdad all the way to Jerusalem. Lebanon itself would fall apart.
With events unfolding across the region at a rapid pace, Lebanon faces major uncertainty in 2025, and its people are bracing for another year of violence. Jacob Russell, VOA News, Beirut.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.